John Harris stared out his living room window, his weathered hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The quiet suburban street stretched before him, unchanging and predictable. At 50, he'd settled into a routine that felt more like a rut with each passing day. The clock on the mantel ticked away, its steady rhythm a reminder of time slipping by. John sighed, setting down his mug and grabbing his worn gardening gloves. At least the roses needed tending. Outside, the summer sun beat down on his balding head as John knelt in the dirt. He'd just begun pruning when a moving truck rumbled down the street, stopping at the house next door. Curious, John peered over the fence. "New neighbors," he muttered to himself. It had been years since anyone new had moved to Maple Drive. As John watched, movers began unloading odd-looking furniture and strange pulsating orbs, his brow furrowed in confusion. Just then, a figure emerged from the truck that made John's jaw drop. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, with limbs that seemed too long and graceful to be human. But it was her skin that truly stunned him. It shimmered and glowed with an otherworldly light. As she turned, John caught a glimpse of her eyes, a mesmerizing deep violet that seemed to look right through him. John ducked behind the fence, heart racing. An alien, an actual extraterrestrial, had just moved in next door. "John, you all right over there?" He jumped at the sound of his elderly neighbor's voice. Mrs. Peterson peered at him from her porch, concern etched on her face. "Fine, just fine," John called back weakly. "Did you see—" Mrs. Peterson nodded, her eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like it. Do you think we should call someone?" Before John could answer, a melodic voice floated over the fence. "Hello, neighbors. I am Tani. I hope I'm not disturbing anyone with my arrival." John slowly stood, coming face to face with his new alien neighbor. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Her skin seemed to pulse with an inner light, casting a soft glow around her. "Hello," John stammered. "I'm John. Welcome to the neighborhood." Tani's violet eyes crinkled as she smiled. "Thank you, John. I look forward to getting to know you better." There was something in her tone, a hint of suggestion perhaps, that made John's cheeks flush. He cleared his throat. "Where exactly are you from, if you don't mind me asking?" "Oh, a planet you've likely never heard of. Elizo. It's quite far from here," Tani replied casually, as if discussing a move from another state rather than another solar system. Mrs. Peterson had made her way over, gaping openly at Tani. "Good Lord," she muttered. "I never thought I'd see the day." Tani turned her dazzling smile on the older woman. "And you are?" "Margaret Peterson. I baked you a welcome pie," Mrs. Peterson said faintly, holding out a dish John hadn't noticed before. "How thoughtful," Tani exclaimed, reaching for the pie. As she did, her fingers brushed John's arm. A jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them, making John gasp. Tani's eyes locked onto his, a knowing look passing over her face. "I do hope we'll become good friends, John," she purred. John swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. This was certainly not how he'd expected his day to go when he woke up this morning. As the days passed, John found himself constantly distracted by his new neighbor. He'd catch glimpses of Tani through his window, her graceful form moving about her yard or lounging on her porch. More than once, he'd looked up to find her watching him with those mesmerizing violet eyes. Their interactions started small, a wave over the fence, a brief good morning as they collected their mail. But soon Tani began seeking John out more frequently. One afternoon, as John watered his garden, Tani appeared at the fence. "Your flowers are lovely," she said, her voice like music. "On Elizo, we have plants that sing when they bloom. Perhaps I could show you sometime?" John nearly dropped the hose. "That sounds incredible," he managed. "I'd like that." Tani's smile widened. "Excellent. It's a date then." Before John could process her words, she was gone, leaving him flustered and more than a little intrigued. The next day, John was trimming his hedges when he heard a commotion from Tani's yard. Peering over the fence, he saw her struggling with what appeared to be a large pulsating plant. "Need a hand?" he called out before he could stop himself. Tani looked up, relief evident on her face. "Oh, John." "Yes, please, this lumina bush is being quite stubborn." John made his way into her yard, eyes widening at the alien flora surrounding him. The plant Tani was wrestling with seemed to glow from within, its leaves shimmering with an iridescent sheen. "What exactly do you need me to do?" John asked, approaching cautiously. Tani gestured to a spot behind the plant. "If you could just hold it steady while I replant it, that would be wonderful." John nodded, moving into position. As he gripped the plant's trunk, a warm, tingling sensation spread through his hands. He gasped, nearly letting go. "Oh, don't mind that," Tani said with a laugh. "It's just saying hello." John watched in amazement as Tani deftly maneuvered the plant into a new pot. Her movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. He found himself staring, captivated by the play of light across her skin. "There we go," Tani said triumphantly. She turned to John, her violet eyes sparkling. "Thank you for your help. I don't know what I'd do without such a kind neighbor." She stepped closer, and John caught a whiff of an intoxicating, otherworldly scent. His head swam. "It was my pleasure," he said, his voice huskier than he'd intended. Tani's gaze lingered on him, a hint of something primal flickering in their depths. "Perhaps you'd like to stay for a drink. I have a beverage from my homeworld I think you'd enjoy." John knew he should decline. This whole situation was bizarre, potentially dangerous even, but something about Tani drew him in, made him want to know more. "I'd love to," he heard himself say. Tani's smile was radiant. "Wonderful. Come, let me show you inside." As John followed her into the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far beyond his understanding. The interior was a blend of earth furnishings and alien technology. Orbs of light hovered near the ceiling, casting a soft glow throughout the space. "Make yourself comfortable," Tani said, gesturing to a peculiar-looking couch. It seemed to shift and mold itself to John's body as he sat. Tani busied herself at what John assumed was the kitchen area, though it bore little resemblance to any kitchen he'd ever seen. Strange, colorful liquids bubbled in transparent containers. "So, Tani," John began, trying to sound casual, "what brings you to Earth? Specifically to our little suburb?" Tani turned, a knowing smile on her face. "Curiosity, mainly. Your planet has fascinated me for some time. And as for this neighborhood," her eyes locked onto John's. "Let's just say I had a feeling I'd find something interesting here." John's mouth went dry. Before he could formulate a response, Tani returned with 2 glasses filled with a shimmering, opalescent liquid. "Here we are," she said, handing him a glass. "A special brew from Eliso. I think you'll find it quite stimulating." John took a cautious sip. The liquid seemed to dance on his tongue, leaving a tingling sensation in its wake. Heat spread through his body, and suddenly the room felt much warmer. "This is remarkable," he said, his voice slightly strained. Tani beamed. "I'm so glad you like it. You know, John, I've been meaning to ask you something." She leaned in close, her scent enveloping him. John felt dizzy, whether from the drink or Tani's proximity, he couldn't tell. "Yes," he managed to croak out. "I was wondering if you might show me around town sometime. Everything here is so new and exciting. I'd love to experience it with someone who knows the area." The request seemed innocent enough, but there was an undercurrent to Tani's words that John couldn't quite place. He found himself nodding before he'd fully processed the question. "Great," Tani exclaimed, clapping her hands together. The motion caused ripples of light to dance across her skin. "It's a date, then?" There was that word again. Date. John's head spun. Was he reading too much into this? Surely an alien wouldn't be interested in him that way. And even if she was, wasn't that crossing some sort of interplanetary line? As if sensing his internal struggle, Tani placed a hand on his arm. Another jolt of electricity passed between them, stronger this time. "John," she said softly, "I hope I'm not being too forward. It's just, there's something about you. I felt it the moment I saw you." John stared into her violet eyes, feeling as though he could fall into them. I felt it too," he admitted. "But Tani, this is all so strange," she finished for him. "New? Exciting?" He nodded, unable to find the words. Tani's smile turned mischievous. Those are the best kinds of experiences, don't you think? The ones that shake us out of our routines, make us feel alive again. Her words hit John like a physical force. How long had it been since he'd felt truly alive? Since he'd taken a risk, embraced the unknown? Before he could respond, a loud crash from outside made them both jump. John rushed to the window, Tani close behind. In the yard, Tani's plants seemed to have come alive. They writhed and pulsed, growing at an alarming rate. One had already broken through the fence separating their properties. "Oh my," Tani breathed. "It seems the atmospheric conditions here are having quite an effect on my garden." John gaped at the scene before him. "Is this normal?" Tani bit her lip, a gesture that was oddly human. "Not exactly. You see, John, there's something I should probably tell you." But before she could continue, a scream pierced the air. Mrs. Peterson stood at the edge of her yard, staring in horror at the alien flora invading her prized petunias. "What in God's name is happening?" she shrieked. John looked from Mrs. Peterson to Tani, then back to the chaos in the yard. His quiet, predictable life had been turned upside down in a matter of days. And somehow he realized he didn't mind one bit. Tani's hand found his, her touch sending sparks through his body. "Perhaps we should go calm the neighbors," she suggested. "And then, John, we have much to discuss." As they stepped out into the yard facing the growing pandemonium, John felt more alive than he had in years. Whatever was happening, whatever Tani was about to reveal, he was ready for it. His days of mundane routine were over. A new chapter was beginning, one filled with mystery, excitement, and the captivating alien woman by his side. The suburban street that had seemed so unchanging that morning now buzzed with an energy John had never experienced. As John and Tani approached Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman's shrieks reached a fever pitch. The alien flora had now completely engulfed her prized petunias, their luminescent tendrils pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "Mrs. Peterson, please calm down," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll figure this out." Tani stepped forward, her skin glowing brighter than ever. "I apologize for the disturbance, Mrs. Peterson. My plants are simply adjusting to their new environment." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened as she took in Tani's ethereal appearance. You're not from around here, are you?" John couldn't help but chuckle at the understatement. "That's putting it mildly, Margaret." Tani smiled, her violet eyes twinkling. "I'm from a planet called Eliso. Quite far from here, I'm afraid. And it seems my garden is having some unexpected effects on your lovely neighborhood." As if on cue, a nearby streetlight flickered and then exploded in a shower of sparks. John instinctively pulled Tani closer, his arm wrapping around her waist. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through his body, and he felt Tani shiver against him. "This is unacceptable," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed. "I'm calling the authorities." "Wait," John said, surprising himself with the urgency in his voice. He turned to Tani. "Can you control this? Make it stop?" Tani bit her lip, a gesture that was becoming frustratingly endearing to John. I'm not sure. This has never happened before, but I can try." She closed her eyes, her face a mask of concentration. The air around them seemed to vibrate, and John felt a strange tingling sensation all over his skin. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the writhing plants began to retreat. Mrs. Peterson gasped. "It's working!" As the alien flora receded, John noticed something odd. The earth where Tani's plants had been was now teeming with life. Flowers of every color imaginable were sprouting at an accelerated rate, filling the air with an intoxicating fragrance. "Remarkable," John murmured, unable to take his eyes off the transformation. Tani opened her eyes, looking both relieved and exhausted. "There, that should stabilize things, for now." Mrs. Peterson, seemingly forgetting her earlier panic, shuffled closer to examine the new blooms. "I've never seen anything like this. They're beautiful." John turned to Tani, his curiosity overriding his caution. "What exactly is happening here, Tani?" She met his gaze, a mix of emotions playing across her luminescent features. "It's complicated, John. Perhaps we should discuss this privately?" The way she said his name sent a shiver down his spine. He nodded, suddenly eager to be alone with her again. "Mrs. Peterson," John said, turning to his elderly neighbor, "why don't you head inside? I promise we'll sort all this out." The old woman nodded, still dazed by the floral display before her. As she shuffled back to her house, John felt Tani's hand slip into his. "Your place or mine?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her voice. John swallowed hard. Mine. If that's okay." Tani smiled, and John felt his heart skip a beat. "Lead the way, John Harris." As they entered John's house, he was acutely aware of how mundane it must seem compared to Tani's otherworldly abode. But if she noticed, she didn't show it. Instead, her eyes roamed the space with genuine curiosity. "So," John said, trying to keep his voice casual as he led her to the living room, "want to tell me what's really going on?" Tani sank onto his couch, her luminescent skin casting a soft glow around her. "It's not easy to explain, John. My people, we experience things differently than humans do." John sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Different how?" Tani's violet eyes met his, and he felt a surge of something course through him. "We have cycles, John. Periods of intense need." John's mouth went dry. "Need?" She nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "On my world, we call it the joining. It's a time when we seek out a compatible partner. The urge becomes overwhelming," realization dawned on John. "And you're experiencing this joining now?" Tani's gaze dropped to her hands. "Yes, it's why I came to Earth, actually. I thought a change of scenery might help me control it." John's mind reeled. "But the plants, the lights, what does that have to do with your, cycle?" Tani laughed softly. "Everything on Eliso is connected, John. Our emotions, our physical states, they affect the world around us. Here on Earth, it seems that connection is even stronger." As if to emphasize her point, the lamp beside them flickered and then grew brighter, casting Tani in an almost angelic light. John leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. "So, every time you feel something, it affects your surroundings?" Tani nodded, her eyes meeting his once more. "Yes. And lately, John, I've been feeling quite a lot." The air between them seemed to crackle with electricity. John found himself moving closer, drawn in by some inexplicable force. "Tani," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what exactly are you feeling right now?" She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. The contact sent a jolt through John's entire body. "Why don't I show you?" Before John could respond, Tani leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The world exploded in a riot of sensation. John felt as if he was falling and flying at the same time, every nerve ending in his body singing with pleasure. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, John noticed that every plant in his house had burst into bloom. The air was thick with an otherworldly perfume, and the walls seemed to pulse with a soft, pinkish light. "Wow," John breathed, struggling to form coherent thoughts. "That was just the beginning," Tani finished, her eyes glowing with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified John. As the days passed, John found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotion and chaos. Tani's presence in his life was like a force of nature, unpredictable and exhilarating. She would appear at his door at all hours, sometimes to share a strange alien delicacy, other times simply to bask in his company. One evening, as they sat in John's backyard watching the stars, Tani suddenly sat up straight, her skin pulsing with an intense glow. "John," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I want to teach you something, a word from my language." John raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Okay, I'm game. What's the word?" Tani leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear. "Janar," she whispered. As the alien syllables left her lips, John felt a wave of warmth wash over him. The grass beneath them began to sway, despite the lack of wind, and the air filled with tiny glowing particles. What does it mean?" John asked, his voice hoarse. Tani's violet eyes locked onto his. "It means my heart's desire." John's pulse quickened. "Tani, But before he could finish, a loud crash from next door interrupted them. They rushed to the fence to find Mrs. Peterson's cat, Mr. Whiskers, glowing a bright neon blue and floating 3 feet off the ground. "Oh dear," Tani murmured. "It seems my emotions are affecting more than just plant life now." As they worked to coax the terrified feline back to Earth, John couldn't help but wonder what other surprises Tani's presence would bring. And more importantly, was he ready for them? The following week brought more unexplained phenomena to their quiet suburb. Streetlights would flicker and dance whenever Tani walked by. The local weather patterns seemed to shift dramatically, bringing unseasonable warmth and spontaneous light shows in the night sky. John found himself torn between fascination and concern. On one hand, Tani's effect on him was undeniable. He felt more alive than he had in years, his senses heightened, his body thrumming with a new energy. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces beyond their understanding. One afternoon, as John was attempting to trim his now wildly overgrown hedges, he heard a commotion from Tani's yard. He peered over the fence to find her surrounded by what appeared to be floating orbs of water. "Tani," he called out, unable to keep the worry from his voice. "Everything okay over there?" She turned to him, her face a mix of excitement and embarrassment. "Oh, John, I was just practicing." "Practicing what, exactly?" Tani waved her hand, and the water orbs began to dance in intricate patterns. "On Elizo, we use our emotional energy to manipulate the elements. I thought I might try it here, but it seems Earth's physics are a bit different." As if to prove her point, one of the orbs suddenly exploded, drenching them both. John couldn't help but laugh at the shocked expression on Tani's face. "Maybe we should stick to Earth physics for now," he suggested, wiping water from his eyes. Tani's laughter joined his, the sound like music to his ears. But as their mirth subsided, John noticed a change in her expression. Her violet eyes seemed to darken, and the air around them grew heavy, with an unseen energy. "John," she said, her voice low and intense, "there's something I need to tell you, about the joining." He felt his heart rate quicken. "What about it?" Tani took a deep breath, her skin pulsing with light. "It's progressing faster than I anticipated, and I'm afraid I don't have much time left to choose a partner." John's mind reeled. "Choose a partner? You mean—" She nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "Yes, John. And I want it to be you." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. John grabbed the fence for support, his knuckles turning white. "Tani, I don't know what to say. This is all happening so fast." Tani's face fell, and John felt a pang of guilt. "I understand," she said softly. "It's a lot to ask. I've never felt this way about anyone before, John, human or otherwise." As she spoke, the plants around them began to grow at an alarming rate, vines and flowers sprouting from nowhere and reaching towards the sky. The air crackled with energy, and John felt as if he was standing in the eye of a storm. "Tani," he said, his voice barely audible over the rustling of leaves. "What happens if you don't choose a partner?" Her luminescent skin dimmed slightly. "The energy builds up. Eventually it becomes unstable, dangerous even, not just for me, but for everything around me." The implications hit John like a physical blow. He thought of their quiet neighborhood, of Mrs. Peterson and her glowing cat, of the strange and beautiful changes Tani had brought to his world. "How long?" he asked. Tani's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "A few days at most. After that, I don't know what will happen." John took a deep breath, his mind racing. He thought of his life before Tani, the quiet routine, the creeping sense of irrelevance. And then he thought of the past few weeks, the excitement, the wonder, the feeling of being truly alive for the first time in years. "Okay," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "Tell me everything. What exactly does being your partner entail?" Tani's face lit up, quite literally, her skin glowing brighter than he'd ever seen. "Oh, John, you mean you'll consider it?" He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "I'm not making any promises, but yeah, I'll consider it. As Tani began to explain the intricacies of Ellison partnerships, the vines around them seemed to pulse with life, wrapping around the fence and creating a natural bower. John listened intently, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Whatever happened next, he realized his life would never be the same. And somehow, that thought didn't scare him nearly as much as it should have. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the overgrown garden, John sat on his porch, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Tani's words echoed in his head, the intricacies of Ellison partnerships both fascinating and terrifying. He ran a hand through his graying hair, feeling the weight of the decision before him. On one hand, the idea of bonding with an alien being, of potentially altering the very fabric of his existence, sent a shiver of fear down his spine. On the other, the thought of losing Tani, of returning to his mundane life, felt like a physical ache in his chest. A soft knock on the door pulled John from his reverie. He opened it to find Tani standing there, her luminescent skin pulsing with a soft, anxious light. "May I come in?" she asked, her violet eyes searching his face. John nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. As she entered, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy. The house plants in the entryway stretched towards her, their leaves quivering with what John could only describe as excitement. They sat on the couch, a respectable distance between them, though John could feel the pull of her presence like a physical force. "Have you made a decision?" Tani asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John took a deep breath. "Tani, I'm scared," he admitted. "This is all so much, so fast. A month ago, my biggest concern was whether to repaint the fence. Now I'm contemplating an interspecies partnership that could change the course of my entire existence." Tani's face fell, her glow dimming slightly. "I understand, John. I never meant to burden you with this. Perhaps it would be best if I—" "No," John interrupted, surprising himself with the intensity of his response. He reached out, taking her hand in his. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through his body. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm scared, yes, but I'm also exhilarated. You've brought color back into my world, Tani. Life. Wonder. I don't want to lose that." Tani's eyes widened, hope blooming across her features. "John, are you saying—" He nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "I'm saying yes, Tani. I want to be your partner. Whatever that entails, whatever challenges we face, I want to face them with you." The words had barely left his mouth when the room exploded with light. Tani's skin blazed like a supernova, and every plant in the house burst into bloom simultaneously. The air filled with an otherworldly perfume, and John felt a surge of energy course through his body, leaving him breathless. Tani threw her arms around him, her touch sending waves of pleasure cascading over his skin. "Oh, John," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "You've made me so happy. I promise I'll do everything in my power to make this transition easy for you." As the days passed, John and Tani fell into a rhythm of discovery and adaptation. They spent long evenings on the porch, Tani regaling him with tales of her homeworld, while John introduced her to the intricacies of Earth culture. One night, as they cuddled on the couch watching Casablanca, Tani turned to John with a quizzical expression. "John," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration, "why don't the humans in these moving pictures glow when they experience strong emotions?" John couldn't help but chuckle. "We don't glow at all, Tani. That's uniquely you." Tani's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? How do you express your feelings then?" John thought for a moment. "Well, we use words mostly, and facial expressions, body language. Sometimes we might blush or cry." Tani leaned in closer, her violet eyes intense. "Show me," she whispered. Heart racing, John cupped her face in his hands. "Tani," he said softly, "you are the most beautiful, fascinating, incredible being I've ever met. When I'm with you, I feel alive in ways I never thought possible. I love you." As he spoke, he watched Tani's expression change, her luminescent skin pulsing with a soft, rosy glow. Tears welled up in her eyes, catching the light and sparkling like tiny stars. "Oh, John," she breathed, "I love you too." Their lips met in a kiss that sent shockwaves through the house. The lights flickered, the plants swayed as if caught in a breeze, and John felt as if he was floating, untethered from the earth. As their relationship deepened, so did the changes in John's life. He found himself able to sense Tani's emotions, even when they were apart. Colors seemed brighter, sounds more vivid. He even swore he could hear the plants in his garden whispering to each other on quiet nights. But with these wondrous changes came challenges. The neighborhood was abuzz with rumors about the strange occurrences centered around John's house. Mrs. Peterson had taken to wearing a tinfoil hat, claiming it protected her from alien mind control. One afternoon, as John was tending to his now wildly diverse garden, he heard a commotion from the street. A group of protesters had gathered, holding signs with slogans like, "Humans only," and "Protect Earth from alien invasion." John felt a surge of anger, tempered by fear for Tani's safety. He was about to confront the group when he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Let me handle this," Tani said, her voice calm but firm. She stepped forward, her skin glowing with a soft, soothing light. As she approached the protesters, flowers began to bloom at her feet, their sweet fragrance filling the air. "Good afternoon," Tani said, her melodic voice carrying easily over the crowd's murmurs. "I understand you have concerns about my presence here. I'd like to address them, if I may." The protesters fell silent, seemingly mesmerized by Tani's otherworldly beauty. She spoke to them of peace, of cultural exchange, of the benefits her people's knowledge could bring to Earth. As she talked, the tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a sense of wonder and curiosity. By the time Tani finished speaking, the protesters had lowered their signs. Several were even asking for her autograph. John watched in awe, his heart swelling with pride and love for this incredible being who had chosen him as her partner. As the weeks passed, John and Tani's bond grew stronger. They spent hours exploring the limits of their connection, discovering new ways to communicate and share experiences. Tani taught John to manipulate the energy fields around him, starting small with making flowers bloom at will. One evening, as they lay in the backyard gazing at the stars, Tani suddenly sat up, her skin pulsing with an intense light. "John," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and a hint of nervousness. "There's something I need to tell you." He propped himself up on his elbows, concern creasing his brow. "What is it, love?" Tani took his hand, placing it gently on her abdomen. "Can you feel it?" she whispered. At first, John felt nothing. Then suddenly he sensed it, a tiny spark of energy, pulsing in time with Tani's own glow. His eyes widened in shock. "Tani, are you?" She nodded, tears of joy streaming down her luminescent cheeks. "We're going to have a baby, John, a perfect blend of our two species." The news hit John like a tidal wave of emotion. Joy, fear, excitement, and wonder crashed over him in rapid succession. He pulled Tani close, kissing her deeply as the garden around them erupted in a riot of bioluminescent blooms. The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and adaptation. Tani's pregnancy progressed faster than a human one, her body changing in ways that left John both fascinated and concerned. They spent countless hours researching, consulting with the few trusted scientists who knew of Tani's true nature, and preparing their home for the arrival of their interspecies child. As Tani's due date approached, the entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Even Mrs. Peterson had come around, knitting tiny, glow-in-the-dark booties for the baby. The night Tani went into labor, the sky above their house erupted in a spectacular aurora, visible for miles around. John held her hand, marveling at the strength and grace she displayed as she brought their child into the world. With a final push, in a burst of blinding light, their daughter was born. She was perfect, a tiny glowing bundle with John's dark hair and Tani's violet eyes. As John held her for the first time, he felt a surge of love so powerful it brought tears to his eyes. "What should we name her?" Tani asked, her voice tired but filled with joy. John looked down at their daughter, watching as she opened her eyes and gazed up at him with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her few minutes of life. How about Aurora, he suggested, after the lights that danced in the sky when she was born. Tani smiled, reaching out to caress their daughter's cheek. Aurora, she repeated. It's perfect. As the days passed, John and Tani settled into their new life as parents. Aurora grew at an astonishing rate, displaying abilities that were a unique blend of her human and Ellison heritage. She could make flowers bloom with a touch like her mother, but also showed a keen interest in Earth's technology, often taking apart John's gadgets to see how they worked. One sunny afternoon, as they sat in their garden watching Aurora play among the alien flora, John turned to Tani with a smile. You know, he said, when you first moved in next door, I never imagined this is where we'd end up. An interspecies family, raising a child who might very well change the course of human-alien relations? Tani leaned against him, her skin glowing with contentment. Are you happy, John? Truly? He looked around at the garden, a perfect blend of earth and aliso plants. He thought of the love he shared with Tani, the wonder of watching their daughter grow. He remembered the man he had been before, lonely, resigned to a life of quiet routine, and marveled at the transformation. Happier than I ever thought possible, he replied, pulling her close for a kiss. As their lips met, Aurora giggled, clapping her tiny hands. A shower of luminescent petals rained down around them, and in that moment, John knew that this beautiful, chaotic, otherworldly life was exactly where he was meant to be. The story ends with John and Tani sitting in their transformed garden, Aurora playing at their feet. They discuss the future, the challenges they'll face as their daughter grows, the potential for her to become a bridge between their two worlds. John holds Tani's hand, marveling at how his life has changed. You know, he says, a smile playing on his lips, when I wished for some excitement in my life, I never expected it to come in the form of an alien wife and a half-Ellison daughter. Tani laughs, the sound like music. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? As the sun sets, casting a warm glow over their little family, John realizes that his journey is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning. With Tani by his side and Aurora representing the future, he knows that whatever challenges lie ahead, they'll face them together. And as the first stars begin to twinkle in the twilight sky, John feels a sense of peace and excitement wash over him. His life, once so predictable and mundane, has become an adventure beyond his wildest dreams, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Dear readers, the story of John and Tani is more than just a sci-fi romance. It's a reminder that life is full of surprises and opportunities, which can come at the most unexpected moments. Like John, many of us sometimes feel stuck in a routine, as if our best days are behind us. But this story shows that new beginnings, love, and adventures can arrive at any age and in the most unforeseen forms. It teaches us to be open to new experiences, even if they seem intimidating or strange at first. Tani entered John's life and turned his world upside down, but it was precisely these changes that brought him true happiness and gave his days meaning. This story also reminds us of the importance of accepting differences. In a world where fear of the unknown so often leads to conflict, the union of John and Tani symbolizes the potential for harmony and understanding between vastly different cultures. Let this story inspire you to be more open to the surprises life brings. Remember, sometimes the most incredible adventures start with a simple hello to a neighbor next door. Who knows, maybe your own Tani or your own John is already waiting to meet you around the corner. It's never too late to start a new chapter in your life. Be brave, be open, and may your life be as bright and full of wonder as John and Tani's garden.